Welcome back. Now, there are concerns over the recent rise in drug trafficking cases in South Africa. In the past few weeks, law enforcement has made significant breakthroughs, leading to 14 arrests of drug mules at the OR Tambo International Airport. This has raised questions over whether the country is becoming a drug hub. Let's bring in Willem Els, Senior Training Coordinator then at the Institute for Security Studies, for more on this. Willem, thank you so much for the time this afternoon and for joining us here on Newzroom. Is this a case of there are an increased number of cases, more of a drug hub situation in South Africa, or is this just a case of security and law enforcement actually doing a better job than before?
I think it's a good afternoon to you. I think it's about both of them. If we see that South Africa is for quite some time been known as the southern route or the southern hub for your cocaine that's coming from Brazil mainly, and also for your heroin that is coming from Afghanistan and Pakistan. It comes via the old Swahili coast that has been there for thousands of years. And then it enters the continent in Tanzania and northern Mozambique, all the way to South Africa, and for here it is distributed. But of late, with our only direct flight from South America is the Sao Paulo flight, we picked up that there were quite an increase in the arrest of the drug mules. For one, it's the only route, that is why it's so lucrative for them. But secondly, it has been there for a long time. And this scenario, I think, is based on better cooperation between the law enforcement agencies in Brazil and that in South Africa.
Yeah, so if we're continuing that theme then ultimately just means if we do this job a lot better, particularly focusing on the routes we know, we are able to then stamp it out. Do you feel like there is still that commitment, particularly then from law enforcement, particularly by border officials?
Mm-hmm. I think so, and it is encouraging to see how Brazil and South Africa has taken hands. Last week I was at a conference where the Undersecretary of Justice was speaking, and he actually commended the South African police and their police for their cooperation, and he promised that the cooperation will continue in the future in order to see how we can curb this flow of drugs.
Yeah, I mean, calling it a drug hub, however, is also a term that kind of makes it feel as though it comes in and out of here almost at will. What is your sense of using words like that, for example? Is that correct? Would that be something you're perhaps worried about? How much greater concern is there right now?
Yes, we are extremely worried about that, and you must just understand that your organized crime syndicates that are actually facilitating this, they are feeding off other syndicates. So if one syndicate moves in, the other syndicates surround them, and they are providing them with other things. So you create a criminal environment that also led to South Africa being rated as number 3 in terms of criminality in Africa. So what we saw also in the recent past, we saw a year or two ago, there was a big drug bust in the Western Cape at Langebaan. Then we saw in KwaZulu-Natal there was a drug bust where what happens there is your passing vessels that are coming from South America, they are dumping these cocaine in the sea with transponders on the packages, and then the syndicates from South Africa, they actually go out by skiffs or by ski boats, and then they recover those drugs. And then it comes into South Africa, and from South Africa, it is distributed either up to Europe and also then to the Far East, to countries like China and also Australia and New Zealand. But also we see that the heroin comes down because they managed to put up quite a few hurdles for the syndicates to reach Europe in the direct route from Afghanistan. So we saw in recent years they embarked on what they call the southern route. So here in South Africa, of course, there's a lot of consumption of these drugs, but the majority of that is then ferried up to these end destinations.
How strong is the collaboration then between whether it be South American and particularly Brazil officials in Sao Paulo, as well then as our port authorities in and around the country as well? How significant is it that collaboration and relationship strengthens?
It's very encouraging. A year or two ago, there was also a very major drug bust between South African police authorities, the Australians and the Americans. We all remember the ski boat that was stopped here on the highway next in Pretoria, and where they discovered also a massive cocaine hole. So that was all based on cooperation between the countries. You know, South Africa is not an island. We are part of the international community, and the better our cooperation with these law enforcement agencies, the more successes we will have.
Does that mean then a lot more funding is needed in order to get this done, in order to get the right technology, the right equipment, the right personnel, a lot more personnel as well in and around, whether it be our ports, whether it be in data and analytics departments, in order to understand these trends a lot better?
You are so right, and we saw that in the minister's strategic plan. He mentioned two of those things. Of course, we have to look at enhancing the numbers of our enforcement agencies, but also we have to look at capacitating them in terms of training, but also in terms of equipment. And he also said that we have to invest in technology, because technology is a force multiplier. So once that plan kicks in and it starts to reap fruit, I think we're going to see a much better improvement in our fight against crime.
Willem, there are many ways in which this is done, and you've just been speaking about a few, particularly with regards to the flights, the ski boats, etc. On screen, we've been showing an image of one assailant as well, who's sort of have these drugs sort of wrapped around their bodies as well. Of course, there was an incident where we had one South African as well with drugs in their hair. Have the ways in which drugs is being smuggled or put through into other countries, has that changed at all? Because if that hasn't changed, why are we still not having the methods to then curb all of those? Because we surely know how it's going to be done.
Of course, but you see, these syndicates are very, very ingenious in how they manage to outsmart the agencies. We saw a week or two ago in Durban Harbour, there was a big bust when they discovered cocaine in bean bags, and we saw that the cocaine was not in blocks. They were formed they were molded in the form of beans. That if you touch it through the canvas, you would have expected that it's beans. So they go to great extent to conceal their drugs. They go to great extent in order to avoid our authorities. But we must also understand, we got a rule of thumb that we say for every criminal of a syndicate that is smuggling, that is being busted, 20 of them got away. We work more or less on a ratio of 20-1, and that is alarming, especially in the wake of the recent finds. But another thing that we should also remember, there's a new trend in South Africa where your methamphetamines are being manufactured in South Africa. We saw the big bust in Groblersdal. We saw the big bust last week here near Pretoria. So that is also very troubling.
Does that mean that some of those plantations are actually being built here, or rather grown here as well, which ultimately means that it needs to then get the Department of Forestries and Fisheries also then involved in this, so greater coordination between government departments?
Yeah, the best strategy that we also advise on is that we have a holistic approach in our strategy, but also that all role players that in your civil service, all your departments, but also private sector must get involved in curbing this. If you develop a strategy against it, you have to have an holistic approach. You have to have this holistic strategy that includes everybody, but also technology, as we mentioned.
Let me just ask a final question, just seasonality. How much does that matter? And I say that because we enter the festive season, perhaps a few more people going out a little bit more, not necessarily working, so having a little bit more fun, and perhaps, who knows, the need for social enhancements, shall we say, grows a little bit more. Does that also create a greater case for the number of these drug trafficking cases that we have?
Yeah, of course, there's an increase in consumption over your festive periods, but also over your festive periods, you've got a lot of more traffic, especially on the air, and the more passengers there are, the more the drug mules can hide behind the others. So, yeah, it cut both ways.
Fantastic. Sir, thank you so much for the knowledge, the understanding, and truly, hopefully, we can get, I suppose, better cooperation, better funding, and better personnel as well in all of this so that we can ease the tension, as you made note of there, 20-1, that when you capture one, perhaps only 20 still make it through. Willem Els, appreciate the time this afternoon here on Newsfeed PM here on Newzroom Afrika.